surveys, multi-source surveys to evaluate their employees. Apparently, shortly after, they experienced a sharp increase in productivity and were bought out. And so from there, the demand for 360 feedback boomed. Back in 2016, it was estimated that 85% of Fortune 1000 companies used or planned to use 360 feedback. And that list contains names like Microsoft, Apple, Amazon, all the big household names. What I learned from this piece of history is that 360s, they definitely work, but not much has changed at all in the last 80 years. The format is old, and to be honest with you, it could do with a bit of a shake-up, but please hold on to that thought just for now. Before we get too carried away, let's all make sure that we're all on the same page and we understand what I mean when I say 360 feedback. I assume that the 360 feedback that most people are familiar with, and the one used by those big names I've just mentioned, is the what I'd call the traditional version, which is behind me now on the screen. At its core, it involves getting feedback from all those you work with, your manager, your direct reports, your colleagues, in some cases even yourself, hence it being called 360 feedback. All those giving the feedback are usually asked to complete a survey. The survey may ask you to rate an individual based on the competency in certain areas, from 1 to 5, for example, or it may ask you to write longer form text, or even a mixture of both of those things. Once the feedback has been gathered, the information may be used for performance reviews, salary discussions, and career progression, depending on the company. Now that I've covered the history of 360 feedback and what they traditionally look like, I would love to ask the audience some quick questions. I do feel like I'm presenting an episode of Who Wants to Be a Millionaire at this point, but unfortunately there's no prizes for fastest finger first. I'm going to launch a very quick Zoom poll. If you're on the call, please answer the questions. So, the first question. Where's the question? So this question would be, do you like giving 360 feedback? Yes or no? So I think there's a bit of an error on the question, but if you could just answer yes or no if you like giving 360 feedback. Oh, I can see the results coming in. So I'm going to, there we go. Oh, it's close at the end. So if I share the results, it's 50-50. So 50% of you like giving 360 feedback. I'm going to share the second question. Let's see. So this question now will be, do you like receiving 360 feedback? Yes or no? Do you like receiving 360 feedback? Oh, I feel like I'm watching the election results roll in at this point. Okay, so I'll share these results with you. So 75% of you like receiving 360 feedback. I wonder if that would change if I'd asked about receiving good versus bad feedback. So the next question, if I relaunch the poll again. So this question, do you think 360 feedback should be anonymous? Yes or no?
That's a tough question.
No, I didn't say they would be easy. Okay. Oh, this one's interesting. I'll share these. So 100% of you think the 360 feedback should be anonymous. Now, the last question from me, relaunch the poll one more time. This question, are you always honest when giving 360 feedback? Are you always honest when giving 360 feedback? Oh, hello, I can see a few of you joining. If you are seeing the poll, the question is, are you always honest when giving 360 feedback? I'll just give you a quick moment, just in case, but chances I can see if you're connected to the audio, so you might not be able to hear me. Okay, I will end that poll and share the results one last time. So 80% of you are always honest when giving 360 feedback. I wonder how many of you are always honest when answering Zoom polls. Just pulling your legs. Okay, so thank you all for participating with me there. There we go. I would now like to dig into that anonymous feedback point and tell you what I think. So 100% of you thought that 360 feedback should be anonymous. I personally don't think 360 feedback should be anonymous at all, for many reasons. Let me take you through them. Firstly, the promise of anonymity can lead people to leave their manners at the door. We've all seen the rise of anonymous trolling on social media. When people know that their identity is being protected, they are more likely to be unkind. Colleagues who have previously clashed may use this anonymity as an opportunity to sabotage one another. Then, when you're the receiver of such feedback, you're probably feeling pretty hurt and upset. You might be trying to second guess who left the feedback, and you'll probably be pretty annoyed that you can't speak to that person directly and challenge their feedback. Over time, this sort of feedback may lead to feeling unmotivated, generally suspicious, and massively impacting the morale of the team. And if anonymity doesn't lead to unkind, unfair, or aggressive feedback, anonymity could instead lead to poor effort. Because if there's no chance that your feedback is linked to your name, are you really going to put a huge amount of effort into giving 8 people detailed 360 feedback when you've already got 1,000,001 other things to do? I don't think so. It can quickly become a tick the box exercise. Anonymous feedback is also counterproductive. What if you wanted to find out more about some bad feedback so you could improve? Well, tough. You can't know who wrote it. Finally, anonymous feedback can be dangerous to company culture. It sends the message that openly giving feedback is discouraged. It can lead individuals questioning the psychological safety of being open and honest in the workplace. So that 100%, I hope I've convinced at least some of you that 360 feedback possibly shouldn't be anonymous. Now I want to dig into the question about honesty. 80% of you said that you were honest when giving feedback, but feedback should be more than just honest. It should be radically candid. Who here has read the book Radical Candor by Kim Scott? It's behind me now on the screen. Let me know in the chat or give me a thumbs up if you read this book. So I can see Fanny shaking her head. I'll give you a moment. Well, don't worry if you haven't read it, because I'm going to give you a high-level summary. You haven't read it, Fanny, thank you. So if you haven't read it, I would seriously recommend that you do. It is fantastically well written, and it's certainly enlightening. Let me give you a quick introduction. So Radical Candor is a framework to guide conversations. It introduces 4 different kinds of behaviors, radical candor being one of them. And it explains why, when giving feedback, you should try to aim to be radically candid. There we go. So this behind me now is a reproduction of the graphic used heavily in the book. We've got 2 axes, challenge directly, going left to right, and caring personally, going bottom to top. The 4 behaviors I've just mentioned fit nicely into these quadrants. Let me take you through them. So to do that, I'd like to give you an example scenario. Let's imagine that we are all co-located in an office together, hopefully somewhere with slightly nicer weather than where I am today. I go to the toilet, nothing unusual so far. I come back from the toilet, but the zipper on my jeans is open. I'm flying low, as the kids would say. If we start with the bottom left quadrant and the behavior named obnoxious aggression, what would most likely happen is someone, and let's say for the purposes of this example, that someone is you would see me and you would notice, you would think that this is hilarious. This is the funniest thing you've seen this year. So you stand up and you point at me and you say at the top of your voice, Gwen, your zip's open, you look ridiculous. Everyone in our co-located office turns around just in time to see me turn a tomato shade of red. I am mortified and I feel like I will not live this down. This is obnoxious aggression because yes, whilst you did challenge me directly by telling me, You didn't care personally about me and my feelings at all in how you did that. The second behavior, manipulative insincerity. Let's say you look up and you see me, but then you look down again. You decide not to tell me. That's not your problem, right? Why should you care? Or you may even go a step further and you may send your work bestie a Slack message saying, "Psst, Gwen, she's flying low." So embarrassing for her, lol. This is manipulative insincerity because you didn't challenge me, you didn't let me know, so obviously you didn't care about me. You'd be quite happy to see me walk around like that all day oblivious. The third behavior, let's say you see me. You notice, you don't do anything, but instead of not caring, you really, really do care. You just don't know what to do about it. You think to yourself, oh, it's really embarrassing. I feel so sorry for her. Everyone's going to notice. How would I tell her? She's going to hate me if I mention it. And it'll be so awkward. Hopefully somebody else will tell her soon. This is ruinous empathy because you really, really do care for me personally, but you fail to challenge me at all. And then last but not least, the fourth behavior, radical candor, here in green. In this scenario, the second you notice, you would jump up from your desk and you'd say to me quietly, "Hey Gwen, can we grab a quick word? Just notice your flies down. This happened to me once. Nobody mentioned it. I was so embarrassed. Hope you don't mind. Catch you later." I'm able to sort myself out and go about my day knowing that no one else noticed. You displayed that you did care personally and you put yourself in the potentially awkward position of challenging me directly. And I'm a firm believer that the best kind of feedback would live in that radically candid quadrant. So we're all on the page now when it comes to what 360 feedback traditionally is. I've told you how strongly I feel that 360 feedback should not be anonymous. And I've shared radical candor with you and why I believe it's so important to keep in mind when delivering feedback. Let me now bring all of these ideas together into what could potentially be a new take on 360 feedback, which is 360 feedback sessions. Now, I first heard about 360 feedback sessions from a colleague of mine. He ran a session where his team all delivered 360 feedback to one another, face to face in a room together. When I first heard this, I won't lie to you, I got a case of the panic sweats. Partly because I started worrying about me having to give and receive feedback in front of others, but also because I was sure that any team would end up taking chunks out of one another, and we'd be left dysfunctional, fragmented, and upset. But my colleague assured me that it went well, and because I am a firm believer in that old classic saying, nothing grows in the comfort zone, I put the necessary plans in place, and a few weeks later, I facilitated and took part in my very own 360 feedback session. And spoiler, it was a roaring success. And no, before you ask, it wasn't a one-off. That success has been repeated multiple times. This all begs the question, why? Why, despite my initial predictions, has it been so successful? Firstly, everyone came prepared. They knew they would have to look a teammate in the eye and deliver some feedback. So they spent time ahead of the session really thinking about what they wanted to say and how they wanted to say it, so as to be clear, accurate, and honest. The feedback being delivered verbally also leaves little room for feedback to be misunderstood or taken out of context. How many times have you overreacted to a Slack or a Microsoft Teams message in the last 2 years? I bet had the same thing been said to you in person at the office, you would have read the situation completely differently. And that's why in-person feedback tends to be better received and better understood than any form of written feedback. I mentioned honesty earlier, and in my experience in these sessions, each individual was and is willing to be very honest with one another because they expect and they want honesty back. The whole team understood how beneficial the session could be for their individual and team growth, but only if they received honest, actionable feedback. And in return, they were prepared to give it. However, whilst wanting to be honest, the team, despite any past differences, have a deep sense of care for one another. They understand that they will have to continue working together in the future, And so while honesty is important, it was even more important that it was delivered with care, veering away from obnoxious aggression and hurtfulness. I also ask everyone to come prepared with at least 2 feedback points, something they really appreciate about the others and something they wish the others would do differently, and examples to support each. I find that balance is important. If you only hear positive feedback, you may start to question it. But if you only hear negative feedback, you may start to question yourself. I bet you're now wondering what these sessions look like, and hopefully some of you might even be asking how you could facilitate one yourself. So let me tell you. There's only 2 steps, and step 1 is an introduction session. The idea of a face-to-face group 360 feedback session can sound daunting, so we make sure that we do our best to make all participants feel comfortable. We start by introducing the team to the format. This is usually a 20-minute session, a week or 2 ahead of the planned session itself, where we cover why we're doing 360s. Is it to improve team dynamics? Is it linked to any remuneration? Transparency is key. We quickly cover the radical candor framework, very much in the same way that I've done with you this morning, as a way to reiterate why courageously honest feedback is important, but to also encourage feedback that's challenging and caring. We present one or two different feedback giving frameworks. So you've got McKinsey's model, Stanford model, the SKF method, not as a prescriptive, this is how you must give feedback, but as some help. Here is what your feedback could look like. You'd be surprised how the idea of a framework can make a lot of individuals feel at ease and make the idea easier to engage with. We also cover an overview of the session format, which varies depending on whether or not the session will be happening in person or online. And to close the introduction session, we answer any questions. We ensure the whole team is happy to continue, and we stress that the team can reach out to the facilitator at any time beforehand if they want any support or to discuss things further. Then step 2, a couple of weeks later, is the 360 feedback session itself. Now, the format of the session varies slightly depending if it's held in person or remotely, but I'll give you the main structure first and then I'll elaborate on the nuances. So the session is booked for at least 2 hours, if not more, depending on team size. However, the session itself rarely takes that long. I would just hate to think that someone has worked themselves up to give and receive feedback and has to leave the session without doing so. I then set the scene of the session very carefully. I ask that mobile phones and laptops are either left out of the room or are switched off with notifications silenced. I also request that not one piece of feedback is questioned or challenged in the space. This is partly to be mindful of time and to partly ensure that individuals giving the feedback feel safe to do so without risk of being questioned. Any clarifying questions should take part after the session. I asked the group if somebody would like to step forward and receive feedback first. If no one does, not that that's ever happened, I would step forward if I was taking part, or in my place, I'd ask the team leader to step forward. I would then ask the group who would like to deliver their feedback to that individual first. Again, I would step forward or I would ask the team lead to do so. When the first person is done delivering their feedback, we move on to the next and the next until everyone has delivered feedback. And then we'd ask for another individual to step forward and around we go again. It's pretty simple really. At the end of the session, I encourage everyone to take their feedback away with them and consider discussing it with either their manager, their mentor, their coach, or whoever they feel the most comfortable discussing it with. Onto the nuances. Behind me now is a photo from an in-person 360 feedback session. I've blurred out all the faces except for mine, if you're eagle-eyed enough to spot me. If it's an in-person session, I ask that everyone prepares either some individual post-it notes or individual printouts with a feedback on per person ahead of the session. Just before the session, I jump in the room and I place a photo of everyone onto the whiteboard. This makes it a bit more personable. At the start of the session, I ask that everyone places their feedback for that person onto the whiteboard by their photo, but I stress that no one should read any feedback yet. Putting the feedback on the board is an exercise just to try and get the group comfortable, to realize that everyone is getting feedback, that no one will be singled out. And it also demonstrates from the outset that each individual will be getting an outcome from the session. Then at the end of the session, I make sure that everyone goes up to the whiteboard and takes their physical feedback away with them. After that, I try to take the team out for dinner, for coffee, for drinks, something to help them unwind and strengthen those bonds built during the session even further. And behind me now is a screenshot of a real life online 360 feedback session. As you can see, I use a tool called Easy Retro, although when this photo was taken, the tool was called Fun Retro. I set up a column per team member, which you can see here, although their names have been blurred out, and I set the board to hide cards. More on that next. I ask everyone ahead of the session to submit feedback to one another on the board ahead of time. But due to that hide card functionality I've just mentioned, it means that only the person writing the card can see it. So in this example, I can't see what anyone has written because I didn't write any of these cards. At the start of the session, I ask that everyone has their camera on, and I ask that you mute yourself unless you're giving or receiving feedback. I also encourage individuals to use the Zoom functionality to pin the person they are giving or receiving feedback to and from, so they can feel as connected as possible. I leave the cards hidden like this throughout the session so that no one can cheat and read their feedback in advance, and I only reveal them as a whole at the end. Following the session, I export this feedback and I create a document per individual containing just their feedback, which I sent out to them, and I hope that they will refer back to it in the future. Hot tip, if you do end up using Easy Retro, there's a tool you can add the author's name to the cards so you can see who is yet to complete the pre-work and you can chase after them. Not that I've ever had to do that, of course. Then it is very difficult to take a group of remote individuals out after the session. So instead, I encourage them to catch up for half an hour as a group, have a coffee, have a drink, again, just to help unwind and strengthen those bonds. Personally, I have only ever had good feedback after facilitating and or taking part in a 360 feedback session. People feel like a weight has been lifted, being given that space to deliver feedback that may be long overdue, whilst knowing that no damage was done to any relationships in the process. And so, a 360 feedback session is a team bonding exercise, because afterwards the team feel a deep sense of appreciation for one another, that everyone was brave enough to stand up and share what could be an uncomfortable truth, that everyone stepped outside their comfort zone, and that everyone showed a deep sense of care for one another and their growth. It's shared experiences like these that cement the bonds of a team, and let's face it, it is a lot cheaper than a team day out. I hope that I've given you some food for thought today, and I hope I've given you some ideas as to how you could shake up that dreaded 360 feedback process in your company. As I mentioned, I'll try to speak to the organisers and make sure that these slides are available later. And if you'd like to stay in touch and chat further about this with me, please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. And all that's left for me to say now is thank you very much and diolch yn fawr. Oh, I'll leave that up for a while.
Thank you, Gwen, for this session. Can we just have your LinkedIn link to connect? Or maybe you should be dropping it in the Gwenno?
Of course. I didn't think of copying and pasting it. What does it say? Link. I'll find it, don't worry. I have too many windows open. You should see the setup I've got going on here. It's absolute chaos.
I had a question for you.
Go for it.
I hope we have time for that.
Yeah, of course.
One of the reasons why most of the time we try to have anonymous 360 degrees is that sometimes there is a feeling that, for example, if I'm talking to my team lead or talking to my line manager, my feedback, even if I give it in candor, will not be well received, and at another time there might be an impact on whatever I said, even if I try to put it constructive. Is it something that you faced, or something that you believe there's a way to do that, to maybe before the session, before, after, I don't know, just throwing the question at you on this point?
So your question is, how would you deliver feedback in this manner to someone in a managerial or in a team lead position? So I have facilitated a session like this with our sales department, our customer department, and their head of customer was in the room and participating. And it can be difficult, and a lot of it comes down to culture, and it takes a lot of work to get to that point where everyone feels comfortable to share. But the important thing is everybody needs to appreciate that it's the motive behind it is good. It's pure motive, and it helps build relationship. Unfortunately, you do need a fairly good relationship with someone beforehand, but it helps build it even further. Suggestions I would have is to make sure that you have a conversation. I'm going to deliver feedback to you face to face in this manner. Is that okay with you? Yes or no? Seek consent. If you really feel uncomfortable, maybe don't do it. But it's worth having that open conversation. Try to tell them, listen, this is why I think it's beneficial that it happens in this manner. What do you think? Just have that conversation with people. Be honest, be transparent, and make your motives clear is what I would say as some advice.
Thank you very much for your answer on this.
You're welcome.
And please, anyone, if you have questions, don't hesitate to just, I'm not sure of the timing. I think we still have a few minutes before we have to close the session, if that's okay with you, Gwenno.
Yes, that's fine. I've just popped my my LinkedIn in the chat now.
Yes.
What was the name of the tool you talked about that you use feedback?
It's called Easy Retro. It was called Fun Retro in the screenshot that I took, but they've been renamed recently to Easy Retro. It's a fairly good tool. They have a very good free package that you can take advantage of without having to spend any money. So you can test it out. We use it a lot, not just for 360 feedback, but we use it for different company meetings, for retrospectives themselves. It's really good, so I'd recommend it.
Okay, very good.
It's a tool as well that doesn't take much ramp up. I don't know about you, but if you ever use Miro can be quite intimidating, people that haven't used it before, whereas Easy Retro, people that have never seen it can easily engage with it. It's very clear, there's not much complexities there. It's a really good little tool.
Is 360 feedback something that we can use, because it was kind of shown as a retro, in a moment of conflict in the team? Because sometimes it happens that when, for example, a product is not delivered on time or stuff like that, there's a lot of pressure that have been put into the team, and we have a lot of blaming and finger pointing inside the team. Right now, I'm not talking about line managers or anything, but I'm really in between the team. Is it something that can be also used at that point, or you believe that we should have a separate session for conflict resolution so that everyone is better in their mind before they do this session? Or what is your belief on this?
I would be worried about going straight into a session like this in amongst or straight away after conflict, when emotions are high, people are tired, they're stressed, because I think you do risk veering into obnoxious aggression. I would recommend do it after that conflict's happened, maybe leave a week, maybe 2 weeks afterwards, so people can calm down. Chances are whatever they were stressed about has resolved, they're feeling a bit better about it. But yeah, I'd be a bit careful and a bit scared of doing it in the midst of conflict.
I think I'm good on my question. Thank you for your answer.
Thank you for asking questions. Thank you for engaging. I appreciate it.
Any other questions, or do you want to jump into maybe the hello everyone, or to be able to directly discuss between ourselves? I think, do you have the right, Gwenno, to stop the meeting or not?
I do. I can stop the recording.